is the GPOTS? What is the GPOTS Fellowship? The Global Policy Diplomacy Sustainability Fellowship was named so by two very uncreative people, those being Arpit and myself. And why I say that GPOTS Fellowship is, there's not much creativity in the name, is because it is quite literally that. It's a fellowship that brings together people who are interested in global policy, global sustainability, and global international relations. It is at the intersection of these three pathways that the fellowship really explores various dimensions. And before I go into the nitty-gritties of the fellowship and Arpit discusses along with me all that we have to offer, I also want to tell all of you that the applications are currently open for the fellowship. We have got a tremendous response over the last month or so in our fall cohorts, and I request all of you to do check out the GPOTS website, www.gpots.org. And the applications are open, and the earlier you apply, the better chances of getting through are. So that being said, what is GPOTS Fellowship? As I said, a lot of the times, most of the wicked problems you encounter in policy, in sustainability, in international relations, or in your local spaces around you in your vicinity are not born in watertight compartments, are not born in silos. There's a lot of interaction that happens across these three fields, and you'd be surprised to see that a lot of the solutions to these problems are almost always investing themselves in each of these three fields as well. So the point of the Global Policy Diplomacy Sustainability Fellowship is just that, to equip you with the tools required to solve these issues. These issues that may not be present for you if you come from a siloed education, training, that sort of thing. And that's an important issue that I mentioned, that I would want to mention right at the very beginning. A very common question that we get about the GPOTS Fellowship is that, listen, I do not hold a degree in sustainability, or I do not hold a degree in international relations. I do not hold a degree in public policy. Well, this fellowship is not for people who already are experts. Yes, it is also for those who want to deepen their knowledge of these various disciplines, but it is open to anyone who's interested in any of these fields. And that's something that I want to make clear. We really believe in diversity, not just of nationalities and gender, but also of professional backgrounds. So in the past, we've had anthropologists and biologists and mathematicians and public policy professionals and international relations professionals and environmental lawyers and sustainability professionals who've been part of the fellowship. So I just wanted to put this out there right at the beginning before I give it back to her.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. In fact, there are some great examples over there. First is that, see, the reason why we started this fellowship is because we were absolutely convinced of the fact that there is no problem in the world that is only a public policy problem. There is no problem in the world which is only a sustainability problem. There is no problem in the world which is only a diplomacy problem. Whether it is about peace in Afghanistan, that has its elements of sustainability as well. That has its element of gender justice that will be talking to Clare about. That has its element of industrial and human rights policies. That has obvious elements to related to diplomacy, to public policy, or if you look at things like air pollution, which is happening around us, there could be a number of public policies related to it. You could be talking about cap and trade. You could be talking about an outright ban or a tax on polluting industries, etc., etc. So there are various policy options. And then there are a lot of diplomatic maneuvering. And, you had the Kyoto Protocol earlier. Now you have the Paris Climate Agreement. So number of stuff going on the diplomatic side, which is to bring about agreement amongst people that, okay, hey, this is the policy problem. These are the various alternatives available. And this is how we are going to sit together and figure out who's going to do what. So that's the diplomacy side of it. So all of these problems are interrelated, and typically what we saw was that most of the programs around public policy, around sustainability, around diplomacy left the others out of the conversation. So we thought that why not create a program and create cohorts of world leaders who can teach and mentor the next generation of leaders on intersections of these three pillars. So that's what GPODs was all about. Now, quickly coming to GPODs as a fellowship program, it's already, we have had 3 cohorts of GPODs, and as you can see that we have mentors. Ishan and I, we were counting, we have until now had about 120 mentors from 37 different countries and fellows from about 25 different countries. So I think this map also needs a little bit of updating, but then as you can see over here, we've had fellows from almost all over the world. There's a lot of, places that we still need to scratch on this map, but typically the idea is that we'll have a fellowship cohort, which is almost like a mini Ivy League sort of program where you have faculty coming from all over the world, you have students coming coming from all over the world, and it's a lot more flexible because it's online and it's a small cohort, so folks are pretty approachable. So that sort of a culture for learning is what we wanted to bring about in GPODs. Now, if we talk about what in terms of learning that GPODs has to offer, it's centered around 3 broad pillars. So you have the courses for knowledge, you have workshops for skill building, and you have mentorship for your networks and exposure. So let me just talk very briefly about all 3 of them before I give it back to Ishan. So mentorship is essentially all of these folks, such as Clare, who's going to be talking right now, diplomats. So we'll have His Excellency Ivan Simonovic talking to you later on, who's the permanent representative of Croatia to the United Nations, and number of ministers, number of Fortune 500 CEOs, number of grassroots leaders who will be talking to you during this fellowship about their experiences and mentoring you during a mentorship lecture, but also an office hour where it's more of a free-flowing conversation. It's non-moderated, and you can have a more personal sort of a time and discussion with the mentor. And that's the place where even we as directors, we don't come in, we don't attend that. It's just mentors meeting fellows in small groups and discussing about their careers, their projects, their challenges, etc., etc. So you get mentorship from all of these folks across policy, diplomacy, and sustainability who've literally been there and done that. And you leave this fellowship with a new perspective, with a new set of network, which is present and active all over the world. And you get a lot of good exposure in terms of what are new things happening. I'm myself so inspired by the work that our fellows are doing. In fact, I met one of our fellows day before yesterday, and she was telling me that she's working for a sustainability firm in Czechoslovakia, in Czech Republic right now. And there she's working remotely from India, working on the intersection of sustainability and industry transformations on energy, etc., etc. So you also get to learn about the new sort of jobs that are there, or the new sort of career trajectories that you did not know exist after coming to this fellowship, because there's enough evidence which shows you that if you have diverse networks, you are exposed to diverse information. And if you have the same sort of networks all the time, then you're probably going to be exposed to the same sort of information. So on one side, you'll probably hear from Clare today about her initiatives or her own career as somebody who's worked for human rights and peacekeeping for women. On the other hand, I see that we have Mr. David Tipping in the audience, who's also a mentor. And David has worked extensively on issues around water and the intersection of water, sustainability, and human rights all across the world. And fabulous researcher on that. So you'll get these diverse perspectives, and that opens a lot of opportunities for you. The second pillar is the workshops, and the workshops are about gaining skills that make you market ready right now. So, while mentorship is for a lifelong relationship with the mentor and for lifelong learning, workshops is something that imparts you skills that you need right now. And I remember Ishan and I, we were at the World Economic Forum at Davos, and we conducted a conference, a side event, as well as a number of focus group discussions over there to ask industrialists, governments, and NGO leaders this one question: that what are the skills do you think are lacking right now, which will be needed in the future? And some of the top responses that we got, we essentially created workshops around those, and those skills for effective writing and communication. So we have a whole lab, and in labs you can fail, you can practice, and you can improve. So we have a whole lab of policy writing and communication. Then fundraising and grant writing was another. Systems thinking was another. So complex problem solving, we do workshops in systems thinking, and we help you then apply some of those frameworks in case studies on public policy and climate change. And then circular economy, which is also a skill, that how do you conceptualize or reconceptualize existing linear business models, or just the way that we organize work into a more circular mindset and into a more circular paradigm. So those are the workshops. And then eventually we have the courses. So that's for knowledge. So you have mentorship for exposure and networks, workshop for skills, and courses for knowledge. And these courses are 20-hour long courses, which are benchmarked from some of the best universities in the world. I teach the course on comparative public administration. Ishan teaches the course on Global Commons seminar on sustainability and climate change. And then we have a number of folks coming down from Cambridge and Cornell who teach the course on international political economy and diplomacy. And these courses give you a deep dive into the theoretical debates, the theoretical frameworks, and even some of the applied stuff and the cutting edge research in each of these fields on public policy, diplomacy, and sustainability. And the way that we divide this course is that you may be studying about various healthcare systems in different countries. At the same time, maybe you'll be talking about public health in the Global Commons seminar. And at the same time, you'd probably be talking about the politics of health in the international political economy and diplomacy course. So the way that we have designed these courses are also that they work and progress in tandem. Yes, and Ishan, do you want to talk about the applied learning and the team building exercise?
Yeah. I'm also conscious about the fact that our audiences are waiting for Clare to speak. So I'll quickly go through some of the major points. First of all, guys, there are two types of networking that we look at the GPODS Fellowship, and I'm sure that you're informed about the importance of networking in today's day and age. One is the vertical networking that Arpit already spoke of, the kind of networking that you have with global leaders such as Clare or such as David, who are here in the audience as well, but also the networking that you require to do with people who contemporaries, people who are in your age and will become future leaders such as yourself. And in that case, we promote international mixers. So we have had conducted international mixers with various universities, global universities. And the idea is to put you with people who have similar ideas, similar education backgrounds, and put you in the same room as them and help you network with those people, devoid of borders, devoid of other distinctions that you'd otherwise have. The other thing that we do is horizontal networking in terms of all the GPODS cohorts that we've had. So we're very proud of each of the GPODS cohorts we've had in the past, including the one that we're going to have starting October 2nd, the applications for which end on the 15th of September. And the idea is for you to have an interactive 24/7 space where you can have your conversations with other fellows. And how do we do that is by having an open 24/7 Zoom coffee shop sort of a place. So there is this link you can log into at any point of time, which is only available to the GPOTS fellows. And you can join in and you can drop a text to all of your other GPOTS alumni and fellows and tell them that, listen, I'm sitting idle and I'd love to have a chat. And usually a lot of fellows come on in and you start networking, bonding. This has in the past resulted in papers and projects that have come up from random conversations on the precipice of networking. And finally, we encourage a lot of these international discussions amongst your peers through the events that we hold with the United Nations and other organizations from the private and public sector, where the GPOTS fellows are the
speakers. In fact, just a few examples there, if I can give those, and I'm conscious of the time, but let me quickly, because I'm super proud of this, that our fellows have spoken at events such as the New York Climate Week. They're again going to be speaking at the New York Climate Week this year, next month, actually, later this month. Then at the London Climate Action Week, that happened 2 months ago, and our fellows spoke at that. Then the UN Habitat urban breakfast that our fellows are represented, and they speak on that. And then they have their own session, which is called the International Ideation Summit, which is organized in-house by GPOTS and attended by a number of our partners throughout the think tanks and some of our mentors as well, where our fellows talk about their projects and their learnings on various different things. So, yeah.
So it's a whole gamut, guys, and it's a pleasure to have someone like Claire and David as our mentors. These are some of the other mentors that will be there for our fall cohort. We have, what we're going to do is we're going to put this PDF in the chat box so that we do not hold you from interacting with Claire and the wonderful discussion that we have planned with her, which Arpit would be leading, of course. And I hope that you do log on to our website and do apply as soon as you can. We'll also be putting our email IDs here, because in case you require any clarification, Arpit and I are always available and happy to speak about any ideas that you might have.
Absolutely.
That being said, Arpit, I think I should give it back to you, and we could have Claire discuss her life experiences, all that we have been waiting for for some time now.
Certainly. Okay, so thank you so much, Ishan, and guys, please feel free, as Ishan said, to reach out to us. Do visit our website. We have about 40+ mentors who will be coming in for the next cohort, so you can check out their profiles on our website. Just checking in if Claire is still there, and we can probably start with our discussion.
Yep, I see her.
Hi, Claire. How are you? So let me quickly introduce. Hi, Claire. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So I'm first going to introduce you, Claire, so that the audience has a good background. And although they already know a lot about you, and I'm sure that they've been researching on your work already. So, but still, as our convention suggests, I'm going to introduce you, and then we're going to get to the discussion. So, such a pleasure hosting Miss Clare Hutchinson, who's the NATO Secretary General's Special Representative for Women. She's the high-level focal point on all aspects of NATO contribution to women, peace, and security agenda, with the aim to facilitate coordination and consistency in NATO's policy and activities, and to take forward the implementation of the NATO EAPC policy and action plan on women, peace, and security. By the way, I just need to make a slight amendment over there. She's the former Secretary General's representative on women, peace, and security for NATO. She has worked as a senior gender advisor with United Nations for over a decade. She has been instrumental in setting the strategic development of women, peace, and security for the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping in New York, Kosovo, and Lebanon. She has long been a champion for women's issues, working with women's group for many years and supporting projects for women's empowerment. She's worked on the burgeoning ICT industry as a communications expert for internet startups and projects that help women and young people utilize technology. She holds Masters of International Relations and Masters of Research from Newcastle University. Claire, such a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you so much for taking out the time I'm so excited already for our conversation because always there have been such riveting conversations with you.
Thank you. I finally managed that button. It's such a pleasure as always. It's lovely to see you again. And it's such a pleasure to be part of these events, which I always enjoy. And the questions and the energy from the students and the colleagues. So it's wonderful to be back. And of course, this is my first conversation post NATO. So just a few days ago, I moved into my post career, which is going to be interesting. But thank you for inviting me.
No, absolutely, absolutely, Claire. So if you could allow me to ask you a career-related question first before we get into the subject matter content. So this is one thing that many of our fellows ask us, that in the dynamically changing world today, we must have plans about not just one career, but then probably having 2 or 3, or, you know, I don't know, some folks have said 10 careers throughout their lifetimes. So what advice would you give to the younger lot amongst us, that what are the skills and what are the perspectives and what are the attitudes that we must have to remain resilient and adaptable to newer stages of our careers in life?
Yeah, I think, you know, many years ago when I first started in my career, the theory was that you found something and you stayed for life. And that is no longer relevant. And thank goodness it's not relevant, because you grow with every experience. And I started out my career working as a journalist, working as a reporter. I had worked in TV, I worked in radio, I worked in public relations. I moved around until I found something 20 years ago that my passion was allowed to envelop. And that was on gender, women, peace and security. But to get to the point in my career where I knew what I was doing and I could genuinely feel I had an authentic voice in that, I had to do lots of other things. And I think it's in that experience where you gather skills, you gather knowledge, you gather all the right tools. Because unfortunately, you're not born with these tools. You know, you have to retool in skill set. And I think what I found through life, through my career, is that communications and how you articulate anything is really important, because this is the way we as humans get along with each other. But the idea to be resilient, to have communication skills, and what do I mean by resilience? I think it's very important to fail. I think it's very important not to always be successful, because you don't learn when you're constantly doing the right thing. It's only the lessons you use are when you don't really succeed. And I have not succeeded in many, many things, but it's a learning opportunity. And I think people, you know, many people need to look at when something doesn't work, it's an opportunity to do it better. And that, I think, has been one of the sustainable factors of my career, is figuring out my resilience through not being able to get something right the first time. And it just gives you the tenacity to keep working towards something. So I think you really do need perseverance, and you need to really have a belief in what you're doing is right. Willing to learn and willing to listen. I am not right all the time. I might think I am, but I'm not. And I always listen. You know, listening to people that can help you change or fine-tune yourself is really important. So I think the idea of communication skills, resilience, and learning to also have sometimes a thick skin, and especially as a woman, you have to not take things personally, because sometimes it does get a little personal, and you have to overcome that. But also being willing to learn and adapt to new skills and new challenges, and altogether then putting these and finding, you know, mentors, finding people who can help you is very important, and learning constantly from them and sharing with them. So I think collectively that has been the baseline for me, and that has helped me through my career.
No, absolutely. I think my own, years of little years of experience have told me that probably the first few years of my career, at least, were about figuring out what I don't like and figuring out where I'm not really good at. And then, I think later on now I'm starting to realize that, okay, these are things that I really like doing, and these are things, I can probably be a little good at, and I can add value in. So, no, absolutely. I think the initial stages of the careers are about just exploring yourself and then figuring out where you want to go. I also want to just let folks in the audience know that you can just raise your hand and come in any time with questions. We are absolutely open with that. And we have a number of fellows in, and they can also raise hands. But I am going to continue with my conversation with Claire. So, Claire, you are one of the role models for women who've really, achieved a lot in their careers. But at the same time, we know that there are still not many women in leadership roles across the world. And can you throw some light on how we may get more women to enter leadership roles at various stages of their lives, and in various industries? And at the same time, if you could also talk about how do you get more women in the field of security, and especially leadership in security, because most of the time the stereotype that goes is, in many of the countries we are still celebrating, and even in developed countries we are still celebrating that, okay, uh, the first woman becomes the leader of this team in the army or in the air force or wherever, in a think tank. So the question is that how do you get more women into security, and also break some of those stereotypes that it's a man's domain over there?
Well, first of all, I think we have to change the culture. And when I mean that culture, I mean everybody's understanding of what is, first of all, leadership. The idea that leadership doesn't have masculine or feminine. It's not divided into genders or other genders or other areas. The idea that, empathy and caring is both for men and women. And leadership has to be, we have to then unpack what we mean by leaders, because I think we have to change the way we also see leadership, and that it's not a man who's going to be a leader, that women have entry into this. But the problem is we first of all, we have cultural obstacles that, especially in security, that this is a man's world, that it's based on, you have to have a background in defense, you have to have a certain kind of skill set or characteristics, which we have to get rid of. Because security is for everybody, right? It's about everybody. And the idea that if we can't be diverse in conversations about security, we are not going to have a more holistic approach and understanding of security, which then puts us all at risk. So unpacking and debunking the myths of what is gender, what is a woman's place, what's a man's place, who's a better leader. I also don't think it's very useful to, when we do see these reports about good woman leadership during COVID, I find this problematic, because where you're again dividing women and men as opposed to the skills and the characteristics that we need. But also women have to stop self-censoring themselves, because when and throughout my career, I've seen this, where if a vacancy or an opening is put out and it asks for specific skills, men will sort of randomly, and this is generalized, so no man take offense to this, but men will tend to overemphasize their skills, and women will underestimate their skills. So women will say, I don't have 25 years, I only have 24 years, so I can't apply, or I have 10 years, where we don't see that often with men, because they're also brought up to have more confidence in themselves. And so we see women sort of not going towards those leadership roles, but also because women are put off by leadership because of the verbal, quite often, the way you discuss men and women in the media or historically. Women have been much more attacked, and it's much easier to criticize women than just men in leadership roles, and that can be very off-putting for anybody. But it becomes specifically personal to appearances or to, certain characteristics for women than it is to men. So I think we have a lot of work to do as we move forward. The idea that we have to unpack first what is leadership, and it's not about a man's leadership or woman's, but what is leadership? What is it we want from a workforce or from a society? And then we also have to give opportunities so that women allow themselves to move towards these opportunities, and that we understand that it's to have a diverse workforce is important. But it doesn't mean that just because you put a woman in a position, you're going to have a more maternal, leadership, or that women are going to be better or more caring, because that's essentialist, and we don't believe in that. That's, people need to be equal on their own terms. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. We're not, and there's no country, believe me, in the world that is fully equal. And this isn't a cultural country thing. Nowhere has got it yet. We have much further to go. And I think we have to unpack and really look at our own biases, of which we all have, as we move towards changing leadership and thinking about leadership.
No, absolutely. And, not just amongst people in general, but then also amongst leaders, because I remember when you were talking about essentialism over there, I remember that many years ago, I edited a monograph written by civil servants on the role of women in, promoting democracy and communal harmony in India. And we got so many essays written by civil servants talking in those essentialist terms, wherein, they were saying that women are inherently more, caregiving, and they're more empathetic, etc., etc. And, we really thought that that's just another stereotyping in itself, and that's problematic. So, absolutely. But Claire, the question is, how do you bring about this sort of a culture change that you're talking about? Is this, just through education? Because there's a number of, I personally believe that just by informing and educating, you can achieve much, but then there's still some upper limits to that, because it's almost like, telling a person that, you got to eat this, you got to exercise so much to get healthy, but just that information doesn't translate into a behavioral change, right? So if you could talk about, what have been some good or successful ways of doing that, that'll be probably really instructive.
Yeah, thank you. I think, making change, especially in terms of getting women's representation or gender equality, it takes a long time. I mean, that's one thing I've learned, is that you have to you plant the seeds and then keep watering them in a way. You have to be patient. I know when I first joined NATO, one of the things I was very keen on doing was changing the language, because the language is part of our culture, right? The idea of cultural thinking, right? And bias comes from that. So when I first was in NATO, we used to use the word chairman for everything.
Yeah.
And people would say to me, Madam Chairman, which just seemed ridiculous for me. And so changing language, it took 3 years. I wrote a language manual on how we would use terms that were inclusive, but it took us 3 years to get to the point where it then was issued by the Secretary General, who then, the chair of the military committee, then changed officially the term, so that no longer was sexist. We didn't use the word manning anymore. The word is now workforce, or work streams.
Yeah.
And that was a huge cultural shift, because you're looking at the military, which is very traditional in the way they see things and do things, but also in the way people were thinking. And there has been a tussle over that, because to me, the foundation of any society is, first of all, language and communication. And the idea that you're communicating in an inclusive way, you can either keep people out or you can bring them in. And to change language, to me, is essential. While jokes may be funny or stereotypes may be funny, somebody's interpreting them as, this therefore isn't for me, I don't belong here. And so unless we can change the basics of something, which is language, which is about acceptability, which is about inclusiveness, we aren't going to move very, very much further. And I think it does take some people to call things out. Now, you know, I've been called everything from the feminist police to the, you know, to the gender think, speak, and all sorts of things. I don't really care, because I think it's important that you do, in a nice way, put people on the right track and say, this isn't okay. This is discriminatory and making somebody feel not included, and we won't be able to progress. And then this is on race, on age, on gender, until we can get the basics. And the basics is, how do we communicate with each other? And so that's the first start. And then you go from there. You do need policies, you need legislation in a nation, you need the framework. But you also need to implement it from a grassroots level by getting people involved and not making them scared. If we see this as a man against woman issue, we will never be progressive. We will never move. And it isn't. It is for the benefit of everybody, because gender equality serves everybody. It makes us better as nations. But if we put it as, I therefore am better, or I need something more than you because I am discriminated, then we just start evolving in a way that's, we're going backwards. And I think we can't move forward when we don't have men and women shoulder to shoulder pushing forward on these this agenda. And that is very important.
No, Claire, I think, you know, normatively, but then also, you know, very realistically, I have a perspective on this. I think that, you know, liberty is good for human potential and good for unleashing human potential. So why would you not allow the unleashing of human potential of the half of your population? So you're, you know, missing out on a lot if you're doing that. My question to you was also about, you know, since you mentioned that we need to work on the sphere of language and culture, policies obviously come after that, but what about policies such as, you know, quotas in boards or reservations in, you know, corporate boards, wherein there are legislations like that in a number of countries for their companies as well as for their legislature. Like in India, that has been debated for now almost a decade, and we haven't really been able to make much breakthrough in the national legislature. We have some, you know, reserved quotas for local level or village level governance, but over there are a number of problems. You know, one book written by Dayabati Ray captures it very well, where, you know, there are local leaders, local women leaders, but actually the person who's running the show would be her son or her husband, who has been contesting the elections before this seat became reserved for women. So I don't know. I see that there are certain advantages and disadvantages of those reservations, but then if you could give me your perspective of that.
Yeah, and then I'll also bring in the question about the women in peacekeeping, which I see which also has a relevance to quotas. Quotas, the actual term for quotas are temporary special measures. That is what they're supposed to be.
Temporary special measures, is it? Okay.
Part of a system, electoral system called temporary special measures, where quota is one of the ways of affirmative action, but they're supposed to be temporary. They're not supposed to be there forever. And the reason is because when you, and this is the difference between equality and equity. Equity is about giving an advantage, where equality is more saying you don't need a special lift, you'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
Equality. And I believe that in some cases, and it has to be, everything has to be relative. It has to be each circumstance you take as it's on its own. In some cases, they are necessary to promote where there is a disadvantage to either women or men.
Yeah.
But the problem is, if we rely on these only to be able to do the job, it's going to fail. And I'll give you an example of this. And this is where I'll bring in peacekeeping. Yeah. In peacekeeping, they have a quota for 15% of women to be deployed to peacekeeping operations. And some nations only have 6%, for example, of women in their national forces. How can you deploy 15% when you have 6%? That means you have to keep deploying the same women over and over and over again, twice more than men. So they will on tour twice a year as opposed to, men. That's technically what would have to happen. So it's not always possible. And I think when you just focus on numbers, you then forget about the institutional obstacles, which are women can't get the training, they can't get the support. There's many things that you can look at, the bias, the stereotypes. We have to look at it as a package. And if you need to have a quota on, it needs to be a quota for a certain time while you're doing education training, while you're doing the structural change,
right,
so that you can elevate up for, and then what should happen is equality just takes root and it's organic. But that doesn't happen. And I think it doesn't happen because sometimes we do the tokenism thing, which is just add quotas. And that doesn't really serve. And for some women don't like them because they say, don't just promote me because I'm a woman. It
absolutely,
it's not useful to my career. It's not useful to my credibility. And then you have this thing where men will then say she only got this because she's a woman. Now, I don't agree with those arguments because I think that they're much more complex now, but I do understand them. And that's why I'm not necessarily a fan of just sticking quotas on and saying this is going to make the difference. I have seen many instances where women, there was a quota for women. When I worked in Kosovo, there was a 40% quota for women to be in the parliament. And it's a good start, but it doesn't necessarily mean, unless you drill down and figure how many women are in committees, how many are tabling proposals, how many of these proposals are acted on, how much funding are they getting. And I think when you unpack it all, then if that quota comes with all of these things that are working, great. But if it hasn't been as part of an institutional process of change, then you simply have numbers, and anybody can count numbers. And do we just want the tokenism of 50% of women who really don't genuinely have access or authority or power? No, we want to have all of that. And so I think I have a very uneasy relationship with quotas because I'm not anti-quota, but I'm certainly not, let's just tick a box by putting a number on and saying we have change.
We've done it.
Being said, we do know we need more than 30% of women or men in anything to make change. You've got to have the critical mass. So how do we get to that percentage? But I think it's a far more complex, and it's not as easy as simply saying, let's give that number and therefore we're going to have equality, because that's not what equality is.
Absolutely, absolutely. Claire, there was this issue that I wanted to discuss with you, and in fact a number of our fellows had reached out to me and they wanted me to put this question with you about what's happening in Afghanistan. So as we are seeing the atrocious news being unfolded in front of our eyes, with all of these atrocities against women in Afghanistan, the international community indeed has been watching in terror. What, in your opinion, is the role of the international community in order to alleviate the humanitarian crisis over there? Do you think that the Taliban regime will be recognized by the international community in the near future? And what do you see in terms of role of women leaders across the world to make the situation better over there?
Wow, yeah. I mean, this is, first of all, I'm brokenhearted about, as many as almost everybody should be, about what's happened. And the idea that women's rights and what is being fought for by those women in Afghanistan, I must say, this isn't about the international community, this is about the women themselves who are fighting for change. And the human rights defenders, what is happening to them, what has happened to them, and what is their future. And so it devastated me, because it makes you question then what were we doing, what has the world done, and it questions where women, peace and security and gender equality goes. I am a staunch feminist. I'm an activist, but I'm also a pragmatic person. And I believe politically, what the international community, what are they going to do? Well, I think, as they all say, they're going to wait and see. What do I think of that? Well, I have my own opinions on that, but
of course,
you know, there's two sides to this. One, and this is sometimes training that's done in humanitarian work, where you give the scenario of a situation where you can either disengage out of principle and therefore have no influence, or you can engage and try to have influence. And which one do you do? And the idea is, will the international community engage with the Taliban to put on, you know, provisions around women's rights and the rights of minorities, LGBTQ communities? I don't know. I would like to see that if that was the case. I would like, if they're going to engage, then that would be. But I am questionable if that would happen, because quite often we don't usually put women's rights as an international community at the forefront of anything we do. So is it going to be at the forefront of engagement? I doubt it, but I would like to see that. Can we go forward without having some engagement with them? That's questionable too. And that is where I think the international community is at the moment. I worry when you have a regime that's, you know, it comes from an ideology that's diametrically opposed to women's rights. Sharia law is not as part of my understanding of gender equality. The idea that a woman belongs to or is under the authority of a man. You know, the Quran does not dictate a burqa wearing, that is culture. So there's a lot of questions for me that worry me about women's rights, obviously. And I listen, and I have listened for the last few weeks to women calling me, women's human rights. We had, when I was working in NATO, had a civil society panel where we had a leading women's rights activist on that. And, you know, they talked about this fear 2 years ago. I worry, like everybody, but obviously I'm not in a position to make those policies.
Of course.
But what do I see in the future? Well, I guess, like everybody, it's a wait and see. But to me, we cannot have engagement if we can't protect women's rights, if we cannot protect the rights of those who need them. Surely that's what our democracy and our understanding of ourselves is about, and our values. So the situation is incredibly concerning, goes without saying for everybody. What's going to happen? Again, I don't know. And where we go from this, I think it is about wait and see, and then decisions being made. But I would love, and I think it's important, nay, I think it's essential that women's rights are at the core of whatever goes next. And that is genuine women's rights, not based on any subcategory.
No, absolutely. And I think over there, what you said about, you know, women rights are certainly on the agenda of concern for the international community, but it may not, at least in this case, occupy the top priority position on the agenda. Speaks volumes about, you know, just the nature of the international community even now, because, you know, having things on the agenda is certainly a step forward, but then how do you prioritize various things on the agenda? It really reflects on the culture and the cultural milieu that we are living in right now. Are there any lessons that we can draw from the whole Afghanistan fiasco?
Yeah.
Or
Well,
is it
I think absolutely this is where the international community is looking now and drawing these lessons, because absolutely there's lessons to be learned. What they are, I think that is a study in itself, and I look forward to hearing what those lessons that we're taking forward. But I think yeah, it's still early days, and I'm watching with great interest where this goes. But yeah, it's very, and especially if you worked on this agenda for most of my career, to me it's disheartening, and I feel bereft by this. It really, and my heart goes out to Afghan women and girls.
Absolutely. We'll switch gears a little because we have a few questions in the chat box before I come to my own laundry list of questions. Tanya is asking that as a student coming out of university who wants to get into public policy and diplomacy, what should be my best next steps? And to get a job requires experience, but to get the first job also requires experience. So as a student who doesn't have experience, what is the best next step? If you could just talk a little bit about that, Claire.
Yeah. I remember those days. I remember the idea they asked for experience, and then you would say, well, how does one get that? I think it's very difficult, and I think especially the proliferation of people coming from university, coming into and trying to find. Now, one of the areas which are, when I worked in both NATO and the UN, would be to have interns and hire them and get them on board and give them even a small contract to give your first start, just getting your first start, getting that first thing. And so being an intern is useful. Now, I started my career by working for free. And when I say free, literally, I would walk up to people and say, I will work for you for free. Give me a chance to show you what I can do. And then if you let me, you could hire me. And I actually started I got a job in radio, I got a job in TV, I got a job in communications, because I actually offered my skills. Because what happens as an employer, it's safer to hire somebody you already know what they're capable of than somebody new. It's very risky doing recruitment. And so if you know what's on offer, it's like sort of test before you buy. And I tried everything. I mean, I wanted so desperately. The idea to be driven to do what you want to do is very important, and to keep trying. But I tried and offered my skills, for free. I would do writing assignments. I would, and then after a while, then said, you have to, then hire me. But I think that's really useful. And I think getting the experience of, if not interning, then volunteering. When I started with the UN, I started as a UN volunteer, which is a paid job, but a UNV roster you get on and you go to the field. And I'm going to say, and if anyone's heard me talk before, I will say this again. Working in international relations or in international environment, get to the field. Get to a place where you get that hands-on experience, and that will serve you in so many ways, because you are showing your commitment, but you're also learning from people who in many cases have come out of conflict or have the less, in poverty. They are those communities that may be at risk, and you're learning. You're not reading a book about this. You're really learning about human interaction and development and international relations and politics, and you see it happening. And I think that's invaluable. And so I say to everyone, get a field experience. Try to join the UNV roster. It's really very useful, and it's how I started in my career. And I say to this day, being a UNV was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had in my life. It was incredible, and great friends you meet and great colleagues. And so I would advise everyone to have a look into that.
Absolutely. And also thanks for sharing that perspective. A lot of times, I've been in that place where I'm interning and doing writing assignments, and a person who's in that position would think that I'm doing this stuff. I'm literally at the bottom of the job hierarchy over here. I'm never going to be the NATO Secretary General's representative on women, peace, and security. But then, thanks for sharing that even folks who are in these leadership positions do all of those, internships and all of those.
Yeah, I mean, Kofi Annan, who was the Secretary General of the UN a few terms ago, he started as a volunteer. He started as a UN volunteer, the same, and rose up through the ranks. Everybody starts from somewhere. Everybody has to start from somewhere. And I think one of the things you can't do, first of all, you have to get rid of any kind of arrogance that you're better than everybody and you're automatically going to be hired, because that isn't going to happen. There's many shining stars out there.
Absolutely.
You have to shine a little bit brighter. So you have to use all the tools in your box. You have to put yourself out there. You have to prove yourself that you are worthy of somebody's investment, and get somebody to mentor you and talk through how that can happen, because you are competing with, with many people. And
that's GPODs, Clare, that you're talking about.
Absolutely. There you go. But I think it's really important to be a little bit humble and also be tenacious, because you aren't going to get a job in 5 minutes. Yeah. It may take, it took, I mean, for me to find a work in where I love, which was in Women, Peace and Security, I'd worked 15 years before I came to the UN. So I worked in many places, and I tried many different things before something gelled, but also something that I got paid full time for. I didn't work 15 years without being paid, of course. But it's, you have to not give up. You have to keep trying. You have to keep investing. You have to keep learning, because things don't come easy. And if they do come easy, you don't appreciate them. So you have to, not give up as well. That's very important.
Absolutely. So we'll take another question from the chat box, and then we'll come to Saeed, who's one of our alums, and he has raised his hands. But then I received this message in the chat box. So first, Saeed, if you don't mind, I'll just take that one first. And this is from Joanne. And Joanne is asking, she's saying, "Hi, Clare, with an increasing distinction between generalists and specialists in modern times, in your opinion, which approach should women adopt as we strive for increased leadership roles?"
Yeah, and this is a good question. And what I say to anybody who works with me or has worked for me, working in a specialized field like women, peace and security, or gender, or human security, or children on conflict, whatever, is very narrowing. And so unless you really want to stay with this, and you're passionate, and you can put up with the pushback, and then you may not want to be in a very specific specialized field, because it does narrow you. And most, many people I've met who have taken more general legal, or more general political science, or not necessarily narrowing in initially, it is a good start, because it allows you to move and shape through your career in different ways if you have a general base of political science, international relations, or whatever. I started focusing on women, peace and security in my mid-30s, and so it wasn't something I focused on. I was looking more generally at political. And so I think it gave me a wider field of which to grow. And then I decided what I want to focus in. But I think focusing at the beginning of your career can sometimes be a bit disadvantageous. Getting a more generalist view of things before then you decide what you want to focus. Because, what I wanted to do when I was 18 was different to when I was 25, different to when I was 35. I originally wanted to be a lawyer, then I wanted to be an archaeologist, and then I wanted to be, I wanted to be many things. And then I focused on what I really wanted to do once I found out also what I couldn't do. For example, I'm never going to be a chef because I can't cook. So, there were things that automatically cut themselves out, and things that I learned that I was not great at, and things I learned I was good at. So my advice is to do a generalist and then a specialist route once you get a sense of what you really love.
Absolutely. Joanne, do you have follow-up to that? I think I'll allow a follow-up, and I'll let you unmute yourself if you want.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Hi, Arpit. Hi, Claire. Thanks for that really interesting answer. The reason that I asked the question is I specialized in architecture quite early, and I did my bachelor's in it and worked for 5 years. And now I'm kind of adopting a more generalist outlook as I do my master's degree and sort of exploring other options, but also considering going into climate change. So I'm worried about jumping maybe from one specialization to another. So you give me a lot to think about, and I do appreciate that. But do you think going from one specialist role to the other is a problem?
No, and I think what you do is you find the nexus, right? You find the linkage. For example, when you were talking about, and you said you said architecture, right? Yeah, architecture.
Yes, I think she said architecture.
One of the areas now that's becoming an area of specialty and an area of real interest is cultural property protection. Mm-hmm. It is about how to protect culture, property, buildings in conflict. And that is, of course, linked as well to climate change, how climate change can reduce or eradicate a lot of buildings, right? So we're seeing with changes. So I think what you do is you find the linkage to move over, and you don't say I'm moving away from it. You say I'm adapting to new emerging security challenges or new challenges or whatever. And that isn't taking a totally different role. It's making that linkage and adapting it. And it also makes you quite unique because you're coming up with something that not many people are doing. And so for me, it was always trying to think about what can I do that's a little bit different within the environment I'm already in. And for me, one piece of security, I focus on security because there wasn't that many people looking at security who weren't in the military. So I think you have a huge environment there, and very exciting one to look at many different pieces and sell yourself as an expert with both of these backgrounds.
Absolutely. I hope, Joanne, that answers your question. Claire, I will have a follow-up, but I see Saeed waiting over there. So, Saeed, would you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Thank you, Madam Claire. My name is Saeed. I'm one of the alumni of G-Ports, and I'm kind of my question goes to the issues are uprising in Afghanistan that has to do with the economic crisis that everybody's anticipating due to the takeover by Taliban. I just wanted to learn from your experience how to use bilateral relations as a means of softening the ideology of the Taliban so as to provide more security for the women and girls in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and I think that approach is hi Saeed, nice to meet you. I think that approach is a very pragmatic one. The idea is how do we use economic leverage, or how do we look at what do you get from something, right? Because one thing I've learned is that ideology against ideology just clashes heads, right? So I can say, there's no point me going, I'm an ardent feminist and I hope you as the Taliban will listen to me, because that's just not going to happen. But if you're offering something, and this is what I said earlier about pragmatism, trying to find the middle ground between principles and values and the pragmatic approach. I don't think you can come in and say, and through my career, what I've come up against a lot of religious ideology that's opposed some of the work I want to do, and I always try to find that middle ground. What is going to work for you, right? I'm not going to disparage whatever it is you're doing, but I'm going to find a way to bring you into the place where then maybe I can make traction. And I think that is the only way we can do this. You cannot stand up and just say, you have to listen to women's rights, you have to obey that, because that's not going to work. But by saying, what can you, everybody is oriented towards, in leadership in any nation, no matter who they are, Taliban or not, the economic venture is going to be queen, as I would say. And how do we tap into that so that we can maybe push whatever values that we believe in? And unfortunately, that does mean sometimes you have to lower your expectation to get a heightened response in terms of what you want. So I do think in anything, the economic, I always used to say there's two things that needed to get gender equality. You either do it economically or you do it through ego and telling people how they look good. And you use whatever you have to get that done, right? And sometimes it does mean taking a little bit of a lower expectation. But the end, does the end justify the means? I don't know. That's for us all to think of, our Machiavellian statement there. But I think for me, pragmatic way forward is the way forward. As long as, you know, we're all getting something out of it.
And
Thank you so much.
I think over there, Claire, I don't know to what extent would you agree with this, that just the whole concept of values is a combination of our aspirations and what is good for us pragmatically, because, you know, otherwise there won't be any difference between values and aspirations at all if values weren't something that we aspire to pragmatic sense. So yeah.
You know, I'm very cautious about values and by using values in this agenda. Because on gender equality agenda, because I think everybody's values are, it's subjective, right? Your value, my value, other people's values. And if you leave it to values, you can manipulate it into any which way you want. You can say, well, this is the value. I believe the value of woman is being protected and not necessarily going out because she'll be at risk. That's a value. That's my value, right? Because I'm looking at women as
always relative.
So if you say economically, what is the economic investment? If you don't allow women to work, you're going to have less money, therefore less GDP in your nation, therefore your nation is not going to be competitive, and therefore you're going to have going back to conflict, the cycle of conflict.
Absolutely.
If you link things to that, I believe you have more of a venture, you're more of an avenue towards getting some form. Now, I may be optimistic in this, but some form of equality, or at least being able to manage in a better way what you're looking for. And I do think that economic incentive and the way we would work around fiscal policy is certainly, as long as it's a fiscal policy based on gender and equality, we have a bit more of traction than that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Claire, I had this one related question, and the one that Joanne asked, I'll come to the follow-up for that later. But then my related question to this bit is that 6 countries recently have vowed to implement a feminist foreign policy or a gender-based foreign policy, the latest of which is Spain. What is, in your opinion, a feminist foreign policy, if you could break it down for us, and how can it change the way that we practice international relations and foreign policy in general?
Great, and bravo Spain, as well as Sweden and Canada and France, and I think Mexico is now working on one. It's very interesting because it's grown out of Sweden being the first country to introduce one. And Canada has a feminist developmental policy, where the others are sort of feminist foreign policy. And basically, there is no full agreement on what it is, right? Everybody has different interpretations of this. Feminists sometimes of the sort of more radical feminists have disagreement with it because they think that if it involves defense and militarization, then it can't be a feminist foreign policy. Others don't believe. So the interpretation of what it is diverse. But generally, it's simple as taking a foreign policy and making sure there's a gender equality aspect all the way through that. That means financing. Are you financing women's groups or things like violence against women? Are you financing even getting more women into the military? Are you financing representation and participation? Are you unpacking all of this from a gender analysis perspective? And when we look at foreign policy, it generally isn't done that way. It's generally that everybody feels the same or thinks the same, everybody has the same motivations, which we know isn't true, but also from women and men, there are differences, but it's also intersectional. A woman
Right.
who's got more money will have a different opinion than a woman who is sort of more economically strapped. So it's looking at, you know, the sort of, in a way, intersectional, but it's also looking at how do we put a feminist approach, or looking from a gender perspective at foreign policy. What does that mean about things like intervention? What does it mean about militarization? What does it mean about financing and budgets and you know, developmental aid? So that has started to be quite popular. I think every country should have a feminist foreign policy. That, you know, to me, that's the way to go. What's important then is how do we implement this feminist foreign policy and monitor it, and who gets to monitor it? How does it work with civil society? How are those groups engaged in this? So that's where we are with feminist foreign policy. I'd like to see more nations involved. I'd like to see it more of a common practice. But I think it's a great start, and I think those countries, nations who have adopted and implementing them, kudos to them. Great leadership. That's great leadership.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just a quick follow up on that. What would you say to the feminists who think that military be part of the feminist agenda at all?
Well, yeah, that's where my sisterhood and I fall out sometimes. The idea that, you know, unless you're Iceland and Costa Rica, just about everything in the world's going to have a military, and a military is a defense for the nation, right? The idea that the militarization, or let's put it, no, military is opposed to feminist principles, I disagree with. Okay. I believe that if a military, now militarization is different. Militarization is where the expenditure for military overtakes everything at the expense of education and health and welfare. I believe you have to have both. I believe it has to be more equally shared, because if you don't have educated population, then you have a population at risk that's going to need protection. If you don't have a healthy population, you're going to have population at risk. So I believe you need investment in both sides. I disagree with feminists that, you know, and again, if you have a sort of a strand of feminism that believes women are all peaceful and women are all holding hands and, you know, dancing around the tree, singing songs of love or whatever. I don't know. I'm being facetious, but not all women are peaceful. Yeah. We know that 30% in any conflict, women are combatants. We know that women are also engaged in terrorist activities. So the idea that women are essentialized is also wrong for me. So I understand where they come from if we're talking about militarization, but I don't agree that you can exist in a world without having military or strong defense. That is the baseline for how we protect. But do we have to do more investigation on things like sexual abuse or harassment? Absolutely, and we have to. Absolutely. But I don't agree with the militarization or the military versus feminist construct.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer, Claire. We have another question in the chat box from Michelle. And Michelle is saying, so she's from the YWCA of India, and she's saying, I wanted to know what you feel is the role of men in global security of women. Do you think gender mainstreaming has become an issue in developing effective programs, policies, and projects?
Okay, so I'll split those two up. So first of all, the role of men in security of women. Women should be in control of their own security. That men do not have the automatic entry into being protectors. I mean, that's my philosophy of life. And so I believe that women are best at identifying what protection needs they need. What do they want? When I was in Darfur with the UN peacekeeping, I was fascinated to see how women had taken it upon themselves in the IDP camp to start up their own early warning alert system so they got across the IDP camp quicker than anything through the noises that would be made to show that there was a risk factor there. When women are given or invested in, or women empowered, they can create the mechanisms for protection. If women can't vote, if they're not empowered, if they're not educated, if they don't have access to money or jobs, opportunities, then they're at risk. And somebody then needs to, you know, be involved to look after them. But we don't have to have it that way when women are given that opportunity. And that's why we have to put more emphasis in getting women to be their own protectors, to women to be engaged in the dialogue on security. Gender mainstreaming has become a buzzword. It has become a tick-a-box go-to. Everybody's mainstreaming, nobody knows what it means. And it's a very long definition from 1997 that everybody just, it's a really, really long definition. And it simply just means we look at everything from a perspective of women and men equally, and we see, are there differences and how do we attach those differences? And many people, including myself, get put off by the definition because I get lost after the second line as it goes on. And I think we just need to say, this is about making sure that both women and men, girls and boys, all have their voices in things that matter to them or related to them. And that's on everything, because there's nothing that doesn't impact us both equally. So gender mainstreaming started out coming out of, you know, where we used to in the 70s have the woman focus. The gender focus came up through the 80s, and gender mainstreaming became the tag onto that. I think it's an, you know, it's essential we have mainstreaming, but many people use it as a term to get funding and do it, or they will put it into something, but they don't really know what it is. And I think many people use it as a catch-all because it looks like they're doing the right thing. Then
it's like greenwashing.
Well, you know, I've been in interview panels where people say, and I did gender mainstreaming, and I say, oh, well, what did that incorporate? And they say, well, I hired a woman. I said, but that's not mainstreaming. So, you know, and that's why you need experts as well to ask those questions, because they can pull through the, you know, the answer that people give when they're using it as a term to
Absolutely.
jobs or whatever.
No, absolutely. Okay, so perfect. Now, I think it's my chance to come back to a question, a follow-up to what Joanne has asked earlier. So, well, Joanne asked you about, you know, getting experience to gain experience, etc., etc. I want to ask more about, you know, is there a thing such as a mid-career crisis, and how do you see people dealing with that?
Yeah, I think you have, you know, beginning career crisis, mid-career crisis, end of career crisis.
Because we do get a number of fellows from GPOTS who have worked, you know, let's say 15 years in a field, and now they don't want to just stick around in that, and they want to change. And it's going to be very instructive if you talk a little bit about that.
Like I said, I changed careers. I actually went to do my master's when I was 34 years old. I left university and my undergraduate, and I was working, as I said, in communications, and I was working in different areas. And it didn't hit my heart, as I would say. It didn't. Right. I enjoyed what I did. I was, you know, having a good career, and I liked it. But it didn't. I didn't jump out of bed every morning because I was so excited to get to what I had to do. But it became part of my life because it was well paid, because I had, you know, a high level job, and all of the trappings were there, but it didn't inspire me because I really wanted to change the world. That was my theory of life.
Sure.
And it was financially viable, but it wasn't part of my soul. It wasn't my spirit. And it was a hard decision because I had to give up all of that to go back to university and to find a new way forward. And it was the best decision I ever made, because I found a place where intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, I could become this person that was then doing what I had always wanted to do. And it's very frightening. It's very, very frightening. But you have to either decide, I could continue on this road until the day I retire And
Right.
at the end of that day, where you look back and you say 25, 30 years of work and what did I do? Or you can say, I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to be fulfilled. And then when I look back, I will have been happy, or I will have done what I wanted. I will have succeeded. And success to me is not about being successful in money or being successful with cars or houses. It's about being successful in yourself. Did I achieve something in the world? Did I make change? Did I? And of course, everyone's different. I'm not saying everybody wants
Of course.
to do that. But for me, the risk of not taking the risk was higher than the other. And you know, the saying is, if we don't risk anything, in the end, we risk even more.
Absolutely.
What is your life goal, and what is the value of that? And for me, it was more than just taking a job that I was okay with. It was having a job that I loved. And I do love the work I do. I am very impassioned by it. So
And Claire, did you at any point of time set like a goal for yourself that, okay, I want to be in the leadership of NATO or the UN at some point of time, or did one thing lead to another?
Yeah, I had never thought about, I hadn't, and I hadn't even wanted to be in a leadership role. I mean, that isn't, I had always thought myself as a hands-on person. And I was just inspired to do things. I always knew I had a rather opinionated mouth, and I was very independent thinker, as I would say, if that's the nice way to put it. And I was brought up to believe that you're no better than anybody else, but there's nobody better than you. So I was brought to believe that I was equal to anybody, and so that's how I approach anybody. And I don't care, you know, from what level people are. We all come from the same place. And so, but my belief in change and my belief that we had to do better in the world was what I wanted to do. Now, being a leader was not what I had thought of, and I came into this job and you know, was thrilled and what I could create and change. But I never set goals in a way, in 5 years I'm going to be doing this, in 10 years I'm going to do this, because I think you set yourself up for failure, and then you can be very disappointed. I think what you have to do is say, what is it that's going to make me happy? And by being happy in yourself, you can project into the world the change that's necessary. And so for me, it's never 5-year goals or 10-year goals. Sometimes I don't even have a day goal. I just go, you know, by the hour. It depends. I'm not necessarily that structured. Everyone's different. But for me, if you focus always on the goal at the end of the road, you miss the journey. And you really do miss the journey. And so understanding where you're going and how you're getting there. I was, you know, in an end, if the term is successful in getting to be leadership, is because I believed in what I did, and I was driven to make change, and that inspired NATO leadership to want that as part of their leadership, and good for them. And so, yeah, but for me, setting those goals that I could possibly fail at was not going to be the way forward, but driven to make change was what I wanted to do.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, Clare, Arpit, if you'd allow me, I'd like
Sure, Ishan.
I have, so Arpit knows I have another session, lecture to deliver in half an hour, so I want to get the most out of this, and I was being very polite in giving everyone the option of asking their questions, and I know that GPOT's fellow, one of our GPOT's fellows, Parikshit, has another question for Clare, but I have requested Arpit to let me go first, because this is something that I had been wanting to ask Clare about. And Clare, one of the luxuries of having you discuss these issues is because we do not have to restrict ourselves to one line of thought. And so I'm going to be asking questions on 2 lines of thoughts here. One is the role of women in sustainability. I know that Joanne kind of referred to it in the way she structured her question, but ecofeminism is something that is being talked about a lot. I teach it in my university class as well. It is being seen as the most prominent environmental ethical approach over the last century now. And historically, we've had right from, you know, Brundtland report on sustainable development back in 1989 to what's happening with Greta Thunberg We've had women leaders who have kind of guided the planet towards sustainability. There's also a lot of, I don't want to use a negative term, but there are pushbacks when this happens in terms of lack of opportunities could be one, but it could also be to do with you have other priorities to take care of. And I think Parikshit's question relates to that. But my idea for my basic question is, what is the sort of solidarity that the world could provide, or maybe a sort of this systems thinking revamping that needs to be looked at to involve women as they are in so many other functions of businesses and so on and so forth, in terms of quotas or reservations. But sustainability being such an informal sort of an industry, how do you integrate more women into it? Is it only through awareness and education, or are there other strategic paths that could be taken? That's only one of my questions. I do apologize if I'm getting greedy. The second question is more general and also in the backdrop of the GPOTS fellowship, to be fair. You talked of law as a profession, and law being a very structured profession is a good example, but you have medicine and doctors, and you have engineers, and you have management professionals and MBAs and so on and so forth. All of these professions have sort of like a training regime through which you eventually become a lawyer or a doctor in diplomacy, despite it being one of the oldest professions globally. This sort of like this training route through which you can become a diplomat after earning a degree, after doing this, after doing that, is eminently missing. I know that international relations is a very prominent branch of studies now, but that's not how you become a diplomat per se. You need to have some other trainings that you're delivered quite on the job more than anything else. So do you think that is there a channel through which aspiring diplomats could take up practical learnings from opportunities that might be available, or opportunities that need to be created?
Okay, so I'll take the second question first, and just for everyone to know, I'm not a diplomat. I am way too opinionated and loud and mouthy to be a diplomat. I have very few diplomatic skills. And so I never wanted to be a diplomat, and never have been, and I never will be. And I think it's a wonderful career. And I think, you know, what the diplomatic corps offers is on the job training, right? That you come in as a younger person, and you get that training. You go up through the ranks. You get deployed every 3 to 4 years. You learn the same as you would learn for anything. You know, you don't become an automatic diplomat. Even if you're the daughter or son of a diplomat, it's not, you know, biologically inherited. You have to learn those skills. And I think the skills that, you know, you have as diplomacy are one, negotiation. And when I first went to NATO, I had never done negotiations in a setting where I had to have consensus from all nations on something. And I remember going in and just saying what I wanted and expecting them to agree with it. And I couldn't believe I had to negotiate and say I would give up some things, because I was like, I'm not giving up anything. Oh, why should I? This is what is right. So the negotiation skill is really important. And I think, you know, in life, it's a really good skill to have, because you can negotiate salary and you can negotiate what you want. So I think these skills you can learn outside, and go to a country and barter. That's where I learned my negotiation skills, buying carpets in Tunisia. So I think you can learn these skills. You can learn communication skills on how to get the best out of. But the diplomatic corps is a wonderful, it's a wonderful career. And maybe if I had been younger, I might have gone that route. But again, I don't know. My opinions take over sometimes. So I think good place to go if that's what you're looking at. And if you want an international job, you want a job where you travel and you get to be part of the political discourse, that is an incredible job to take, especially if you get posted to, for example, New York to the UN, and you watch Security Council engagements. I mean, it's fascinating. On the second thing about feminism and ecofeminism, and I'm just going to say in terms of just in specializations and careers, when I went to university and I did politics, and we shared the corridor with the lawyers, with the law students, and the law students used to stick up an envelope on the wall, and they would put in blank pieces of paper and say, political affairs degrees, please take one. Because they thought we were just all, you know, out drinking and didn't really work at all. And so there was a huge fight between the legal scholars and the political affairs scholars. But on the ecofeminism, I think for women getting into climate change, it's much more open and embracing than it is, for example, in security. Right. Because there seems to be like, there's assumption that there's an automatic fit. That climate, that Mother Earth and the climate, that women would automatically be assumed to be part of it. Now, what has happened though, and this is in any environment, in any career, same with technology. Initially, women were called computers. Women in the 50s were called physically computers. They were computers because they did the computing when it didn't cost or it wasn't, you know, a good career to have. The minute it becomes a career that's lucrative, men take over. Yeah. And so then it became much more of a technology male-based environment. And I think the same with climate change will happen. Right? Because from the very beginning, we see anywhere the blue economy, we see, you know, what women are investing or how women are doing business in terms of climate change and how they're at risk. I remember being in South Lebanon when I worked with the UN, and there was a training on environmental disaster relief, and the training was given to men. But it's the women who are there, who are in any, and we see this with floods, we see this with earthquakes, the women looking after old and the young and those who are, you know, at risk. So the idea that we still aren't seeing the role of women or the role writ large of feminism in this environment has to change. But I think the connection between climate change, for me, that's interesting, is with security. And I think I've explained this before about in northern Mali in the 80s during the drought, where you had a lot of men leave looking for jobs elsewhere, you know, as you would have to, and then leaving behind women who then only got support from Al-Qaeda Maghreb. So the idea that climate change for me is interlinked to everything. It's not just about sustainability factor or about, you know, environmentalism, but it really is about migrancy and terrorism and connection to security. And once we make those linkages and then we put gender into it, then we have a good start. Then we understand this as a holistic approach. And that for me is where I'd like, you know, climate change in part to go, where we understand the security risks. And then I think you'll have much more investment in it, because that's where the money will come from, because it's about it.
I think that's a fascinating way to look at it, and also sort of like the common thread being the GPODS fellowship, if I may, how you have to look at all of these things holistically. But Claire, I apologize to all the audience members. Sorry guys if I was being greedy there, but I just wanted to ask a couple of questions of my own. I'll give it back to Parikshit. Parikshit has been waiting in the queue for a bit. Sure. And Parikshit, you could go ahead with your question whenever you're ready.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I was not allowed to unmute anyway. Thank you, Ishan. And hi, Claire. I think I met you at the GPODS office hour a few months back, I think last month. Thank you for joining in. Nice to meet you today. One of the questions I thought I had was on alternate family structures and social structures, and its impact on the problem of gender inequity, and seeing, you know, more women in leadership. So I just wanted to pick your brain on that.
So when you say alternate family structure, are we talking about LGBTQI connections there? What do you mean?
Oh yeah. So in terms of right now, I think most of the family structures we have is the networks are woven by biology. So I'm talking about, let's say I'm married to a female and I have a child, and the female is unable to get to work because she has to take care of the child, and there is a bit of a hiatus in her career. So if we can have structures wherein all of us live under the same roof, multiple families live under the same roof, or somehow you forge a connection such that it helps women get into the corporate ladder. So I was just spitballing on that. So you play with the structures. It's just not your sister, your brother, and your mother's children, your mother's brother, but it's going to be a more extended family that extends beyond your family boundaries.
Interesting. I mean, that's
and also polygamous relationships. Maybe I'm just floating it around. So playing with the relationship paradigm, basically.
Mm-hmm. I think it's very interesting, and I think what we are seeing is the nuclear family, the idea that what is family, right? We create our own family today, right? People create family with other friends, with multiple partners, with whatever you identify. And I think part of the progression of life, which is positive, is that you can identify in your identity or sexual identity, you can identify an individual family, you can identify friends as your sisters or brothers. I think that is a positive. In terms of, I mean, that's a commune. I lived many years ago when I was 18 in a commune-like structure, where you did have that, where the children were brought up by everybody, that there was no specific connection really as a family unit. I think it depends on different in environments and structures. But what I will say is that we would all have that freedom to be, to express and to have our opportunities if we had genuine gender equality, because now things like child rearing is the responsibility of the women. And if we didn't have that and we had enforced paternal leave, if we had enforced or that looking after home and children, taking care of children was paid for, and that we changed the way we understood who does what or what roles take place, we would have much more of an equal and progressive society. But that doesn't happen. And so, men are constrained into certain things that they have to do in a family unit, as are women. And I think that is the challenge we should try to overcome first. Then we talk about, blended families or multiple different situations. Why not? But we would still end up, as you would always, women are still, even in a group of gathering, women would still have the same roles. And you've seen this time and time again in studies about communal living. The women are still doing cooking, they're still doing the child rearing. It's not as easy as that. So I think we have a lot more work to do about structural unpacking, while that might be a way forward, but I'm sure not for everybody.
Well, Parikshit, okay, we need to unmute Parikshit. Whoever has the, yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Oh, thank you very much. So I just wanted to ask Arpit the question. So Arpit, where do you see the policy problems over here? To both of you as well. So when she mentioned about structural issues, so what are the policy problems that?
I mean, some obvious policy problems over there would be that in India, for example, you have marriage laws, and you have marriage laws for various religions. At least if you're a Hindu, then you have a whole Hindu marriage code. So, all of that will need to be revised. So I think that's my very basic and boring answer. But yeah.
No. This was just to float around, not to put you in a spot. Yeah. Interesting. So the reason for my question and to float this around was it stemmed from the fact that I was reading upon on testosterone suppression system, and it was talking about how if you let men marry more than one female at a time, they were linking it to sperm count and so many other things, because I thought, maybe this could be a solution, to get rid of the virility myth, which impacts biodiversity. So yeah, it was a chain of thoughts, that led me to this question, and I thought I'll just float it out.
I will have to read about it to come up with a more reasoned opinion.
I think,
Sure.
if you have, I mean, as long as women can marry many, many men at the same time, then I think
Absolutely.
things are fine, right? I think it's
Mhm.
when it's about one of the sexes as opposed to the other. And
Exactly.
polygamy, whatever you think about that, but if women can do it too, then we're talking about equal systems. But otherwise, that's it's still sexist.
Absolutely. I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I think, Claire, we've kept you in for too long, but such a pleasure as always to have you with us. It has never been the case where I have had a conversation with you that I haven't thought about for days and days after that. So I hope that, our chain of conversation keeps going. And I, again, on behalf of GPods and the whole community, thank you for taking out the time and always being so candid. We don't need diplomats who cannot be that candid. So thank you. Thank you so much for that, Claire.
Thank you very much, and see you again. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And for the rest of our audience, we will stick around. You guys can take a little break, and we have His Excellency Mr. Ivan Simonovic joining us in half an hour. He is the permanent representative of Croatia to the United Nations. And meanwhile, what we can probably do is play a little video of GPods for a recap. And if Saeed, Pari, China, if they're still hanging around, then we have a little conversation from them about the 3 takeaways that they have from the GPods Fellowship experience. So we'll talk about that. But let us give you a little break by watching this really interesting video. So Rashi, over to you to play that.
Sure.
This is a place where, you are not really a student. We are not really teachers. We are all coming together in a community of fellowship. And that's the reason why we call it a fellowship, where we think that everybody makes knowledge or builds knowledge based on the ideas that they already have in their mind.
Problem is greenhouse gas emissions that affect the temperature of the climate.
You have to go back to the basics each time you feel you run into an ambiguous situation. And that's where things like critical thinking and problem solving and root cause problem solving comes in, which, for example, starts with defining first what the problem is rather than getting into solving the problem.
We're seeing the limits of the multilateral system as it was conceived 75 years ago being reached. And you see a big fight going on many levels, including these disarmament affairs. On, let's say, I always say it's basically 3 levels that we see fights going on here in the UN, including on disarmament affairs. The first is on language, the second is on money, and the third one is on positions.
Companies like Microsoft is a good example that have committed even not just to become net zero, but they want to sort of offset their historic emissions as well. So those are incredibly ambitious targets, and that's good. We want that ambition, we want that awareness.
Policy making body on environment at the same level with the General Assembly for all other issues globally. But for environment, it established the United Nations Environment Assembly.
ION term, IOI, or impact on investment. So that's essentially what this, your management really should all be about. You're trying to maximize the impact of investment.
The fact that the G7 came together and pledged an additional 1 billion doses of the COVID vaccine next year on top of the 1 billion that's already been promised. This is important. Of course, there's been criticism saying that's not enough. Well, of course it's not enough, but still, that's 1 billion.
You might define it as coordinated and synchronized action that often deliberately targets democratic states and institutions.
As an international relations and diplomacy, it often is very important, to be heard, to be able to state your case and your position. Whether you get it in the end is a different story, but in order, you have to be transparent, you have to be inclusive. And that was something that Copenhagen was not. As you perhaps know, there were like backdoor negotiations, but Paris was very, very open, very inclusive.
Every year I went to the NASCOM annual conference. Fantastic. You met people who were thinking out of the line, out of the box. It's not a small box, but a huge box and so forth. It shows that Egypt has a capacity to develop a global industry that can service the whole world, the whole corporate world.
New technologies are emerging and being developed at a faster pace than ever. So I do think that we are going to need to do a kind of a bigger job than we are doing today in a way to get new kinds of arms control in a broad sense to work on, to discuss about the role of these.
Science of attribution, of being able to say, has changed so much that now you are able to look at the probability of events happening and the link to climate change, the link to fossil fuels. We're seeing incredible things happening in courts these days.
GPODS has helped us build such a rich network of professionals who are truly global and, are actually working at the cutting edge of solving some real policy problems.
The ability of GPODS to actually stimulate us intellectually is what best qualifies and characterizes it. I feel personally, for me, it has really broadened my horizons.
So grateful to have had this opportunity over the last 3 months to get to know you all and also just have such incredible mentorship and intellectual stimulation. Coming out of grad school, I think I was really lacking that in my life, and to be able to have such dynamic conversations.
I would like to look at a case study of Cambodia in Thailand. In Thailand, in 2018, the government actually set aside a social security program that also provides an health security for the 1/5% of the urban poor, and it is called National Health Equity Program. And in this equity program, it comes with 2 facets. Number one, it's helped to guarantee the health security of the people of the 1/5% of urban poor and the poorest of the poor in the country, and also help to empower the hospitals and the district hospitals with equipment, with facilities that could aid them in attending to the urban poor.
As I said, Venezuelan migrant women, and they are caught in between a situation where their original healthcare system of their home country is not adequate to meet the needs and expectations of COVID-19. So they historically have been migrants to neighboring countries such as Colombia, but because of the restrictions on equal access to healthcare as well as other universal human rights in Colombia, it becomes a precarious situation for these migrant women who are looking for safe jobs, who are trying to avoid gender-based violence, which unfortunately is very frequently occurring over there, on top of not having that healthcare access, and are actually, in most cases, forced to return home to Venezuela. And during this pandemic, it's not good. And generally,
it was an amazing experience, because I would say I've come from a totally quantitative background, and this program has given my mind some great wings, because I've met mentors from different walks of life and transcending many different avenues of human endeavor. So in that sense, I would say it's total diversification, and very, very thankful to GPODS and to the fellow mates.
Thank you so much, Rashi, for that video. And okay, let's get Saeed and Pariksha. Cheena just messaged me that she's still in office, but she wanted to hear Claire. But if Pari and Saeed are here, maybe if you could talk a little bit about your 3 takeaways from GPODs. I think that would be really interesting. And if there's anybody in the audience right now who wants to ask any questions or have a discussion about what GPODs is all about and what do we offer and what is in it for you, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll unmute you and we'll answer your question. So yeah, Pari. Rashi, I think we'd need your help.
All good. Yeah, all good. Thank you. 3 takeaways. No, I will just focus on takeaways because so some of the takeaways is probably very obvious is the networking bit. And I was exposed to a bewildering array of perspectives. So that was fantastic. And I also had to step out of my comfort zone because as I mentioned, it was all equations and mathematics and simultaneous equations and linear algebra, and now suddenly, a leap into public policy, and it was pretty nice. It gave me an exposure into many of the issues that we face today in terms of international relations and economics, and global commons was something that was very interesting, and it piqued my curiosity. And climate change economics, anthropology, and human ecology, and it has given me a good sense of direction, some sense of direction on how I need to structure at least the rest of my at least the next few years in terms of where my interests would lie. So it has given me some bit of a North Star. So networks, bewildering array of perspectives, and good friends from across the globe. I'm still learning. So it is, I would say, as you mentioned, it is the watershed moment, and I was at a watershed threshold, and of course, it really has given me a good springboard. So do try out and check out gpods.org. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pari. And Pari, just a question over there. What were some of your favorite mentors whom you interacted with, and are you in touch with any of the mentors?
I have messaged a few. I've connected with so many of them. I've messaged a few in the past few weeks, but I will be reaching out to them. But if you ask me about my favorite mentors, there are so many. I would say, since I'm an applied mathematician, so I would say Rajesh. But I will have to reach out to him. But there are so many of them that I've interacted closely to understand their life story.
Rajesh is this neuro-behavioral scientist from MIT.
Yes. A cognitive scientist as well as a PhD in mathematics. So so many of them. Even as I mentioned, Professor Oliver. Who joined in from Stellenbosch. Yeah, Stellenbosch. That's very good. If you really have deep conversations with him, it was very nice, and we did talk about his hobbies and skiing in Europe and so many other things. And let me try to recall. It's been a few months now, so of course, if Saeed has something, he can pitch in.
Sure. Let me bring Saeed in. I know Saeed Saeed has met a couple of our mentors, John Dixon in person. We saw the photographs there. But Saeed,
that's in Philadelphia, right?
Yeah.
That's good.
So Saeed, if you can just share your 3 takeaways from GPODs and who have been some of your favorite mentors there.
Thank you very much, Alfred. I was actually away from my desk for a while.
By the way, did you guys catch the video from Queen Diambi recently?
Yeah, I saw it where she was actually driving through the boats. And
5 years of her competing.
That was great. That was really
awesome.
Great. Yeah. So my 5 takeaway. Number 1 is it broadens your horizon. Being part of GPODs actually make you expose and also try to explore new areas where you've actually not done much, like in diplomacy? What is it in? You speak to people that are very much uncommon, because a lot of people, they are so time conscious and they're able to give you the time and also give you the insights towards things. And one specific thing actually threw me, they give you the background experience of how some cases were being prepared that becomes a very large, like the Paris Accord and stuff. They give you some of the major or hidden things you don't see on front pages of paper.
Yeah,
which is really, really very, it's actually go a long way to touch me about Jupiter, because when you have discussion with them, they try to provide some explanations to why some things actually happened, and from there you begin to understand the main text of what is written in bigger books that you read every day, and you try to make sense of them. So another thing is networking. It actually gives you a very broad network of people of different disciplines whom you're able to converse with, not only by formal discussion, informal discussion. Like John Dixon, I could tell you I was just in his house last week.
Yeah.
Just this last week, I was there and we were just interacting, and we were like talking so many things. We even went to the Indian American show. We went there, so you could know.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we were there. Indian American show.
You and who all?
Yeah, with John Dixon. We're just.
Oh, nice, nice,
yeah.
nice.
So we're even conversing with them, and we enjoy the experience together and stuff. I think that really goes a long way to really tell one that being part of G-Pod is not mere benefits. You gain more benefits of closeness with people, and also in reality, be able to converse with them. And another thing I want to talk about is the experiential learning. There's some learning you comfort with in terms of experience. You tap into people's experience, not only hands-on, but when people are able to like show you comparative things of what they've experienced, they've gone through. So you learn from them of what are the biases, what are the loopholes, how to untangle these, and like what Claire was actually trying to tell us about our experience. She was not meant to do this, she had to do this, it's a huge risk, and people now have the understanding to do that. So I think it's a lot to take away from G-Pod. It's a very, very massive big, for me, it's a win. It's a very, very massive win. And also it was from G-Pod I drove with the concept of the paper I just published. So I think, yeah, sure.
Absolutely. And I think, Saeed, it is just such a pleasure to see you back. I know that we spoke only yesterday or day before in the night about your latest article, which is out. And I started actually reading that bit, and it's absolutely well written and so fascinated. I would hope to say that I played a part in the writing lab.
Sure.
but it does absolutely come out very well. I'm interested in reading the whole of it with great attention.